Hi, I'm Laureen Grubert, and I'm a member of the Peace and Justice Task Force and former co-chair of the Peace and Justice Task Force. I've been involved with Peace and Justice Task Force since its inception after 9/11, and during that time we've done a lot of really important programs, many of which have been with the Big Apple Coffee Party. For a number of years, we were just focusing on one issue at a time, such as money in politics or racial justice. But since the election, there's been an intersectionality of issues that people have been concerned about, and so they wanted to address a number of issues. So membership has increased, and committees have been formed. And some of them are immigration and climate change, mass incarcerations. So this is, they'll be starting up new programs again in the fall, but this year, for the first time, they're going to be doing a summer film series, and there's some programs in the back for people to take with them if they're interested. And if you like what you hear and you're not on our mailing list, there's also sign up, and you can take advantage of some of the programs in the future. I also wanted to mention that this is a free program, as are most of our programs, but anybody who would like to donate anything, there are baskets in the back, and they would be very much appreciated. And most importantly, we're very happy that the Big Apple Coffee Party has brought this event with the Peace and Justice Task Force. It's a timely issue that many of us are very concerned about. So I'd like now to turn the program over to Alan Bailey, who's with the Big Apple Coffee Party, to tell you something about them.
Thank you, Lorene, and All Souls Unitarian Church. Big Apple Coffee Party and Peace and Justice Task Force of All Souls Unitarian Church have had a long and fruitful relationship, putting on forums going back to 2010. From our first forum, Should Corporations Decide Our Elections, to our last one, Unfinished Business, Freeing Ourselves from Racism. Our original mission was to try and eliminate the corrosive effects of money in the political sphere. That notion is probably more valid today than it was 7 years ago. We are committed to civil discourse and acting independently of political parties. Over the years, we have felt the need to branch out and deal with a wider range of issues. Currently, we are under assault from many directions as issues we thought that had been settled are under attack. Big Apple Coffee Party has always felt that part of its mission was to educate ourselves and our community. We feel that if there is something we are interested in, there is probably a broader public that would be interested too. This forum tonight on fake news continues part of our mission. We feel that we have put together an expert group of speakers and moderator to explore this topic. Our moderator, Margaret Kimberley, is editor and senior columnist at Black Agenda Report. She is a regular guest on radio and internet talk shows and has appeared on Al Jazeera English, RT, WBAI, KPFK, Press TV Iran, The Real News Network, Govor Moskva, and Grit TV. She was a contributor to the 2014 book, Killing Trayvons, an anthology of American violence. Ms. Kimberley serves on the Administrative Committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition and the advisory board of exposedfacts.org. She is writing a book about racism and the American presidency. Good evening, Kimberley. Ms. Kimberley, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the Big Apple Coffee Party and All Souls Church for inviting me and for hosting this event. To have this very timely and important discussion. The term fake news is new, those words, but there's nothing new about being lied to. There's nothing new about propaganda. I've realized as an adult, I was taught fake news my whole life, of everything from the founding of the country to Abraham Lincoln being against slavery to the Gulf of Tonkin resolution to the case for WMD, the case for mass incarceration. We all have been indoctrinated, and Americans don't like to think of themselves that way. But we are, in fact, indoctrinated with lies. And that is a constant, unfortunately. It doesn't have to be for us as individuals, and that's why we come to events like this, to talk with each other, to learn from speakers such as our panelists about how to discern the truth. And it does get harder and harder. That's not something that any of us have imagined. We have a system whereby the elites here in this country and around the world work hand in glove with the corporate media. And the fact that the media is corporate, that the largest media outlets, the ones that give us most of the news, the fact that they are parts of large conglomerates, that fact in and of itself tells us how much danger we are in as the world faces so many different crises, from the environment to the stresses on the capitalist system. And we've seen all this come into play in this last year or so with, actually before last year, and I know we'll have to, of course, talk about the presidential election, but ever since 2008, I think that was a watershed year, the collapse of the economy, Obama becoming president, the surprise to most of us, myself included, with Donald Trump emerging victorious. So this is a very pivotal time, and it's very important for all of us to come together at this moment and determine truth from fiction. So I'm just going to speak very briefly with those remarks, and then I'm going to turn it over to our speakers, and I'll introduce them one at a time. Yes, we do have 2 speakers now instead of 3, but that's great. Everybody gets a little more time to talk, and we'll have a little more time to talk with one another and to have Q&A with all of you. So, as you should have your programs, but I'll just read briefly. Ray McGovern is going to be our first speaker. He has a very interesting life, served as an Army officer. Not that I have to say, the sort of bio that is not the kind of person that I usually would have associated with. Army officer, CIA, it's generally not my thing. But at any rate, there's hope for everyone. Served as an Army officer and a CIA analyst for 30 years, specializing in Russia. I guess that's what brings us together. He prepared the president's daily briefs for Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Reagan, and was awarded the Intelligence Commendation Medal, which he returned in March 2006 in protest against torture. Give him up. Give it up. In January of 2003, he co-founded the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity to warn Presidents Bush and Cheney that the pre-Iraq War intelligence was fraudulent. It turned out this was hardly news to them and to a complicit mainstream media that kept it from the American people. And it was no surprise to anybody paying attention either. But anyway, Ray McGovern.
Can you hear me okay? Thank you, Margaret, for having me here despite my checkered career. I was staying last night where Dorothy Day spent her last days, and so I come here especially inspired and especially mindful of the filthy, corrupt system that is the main problem. But I'd like to start off with a little quote from Martin Luther King Jr., whose portrait is all over the walls at the Catholic Worker down there on 3rd Street. It has to do with what we are about this evening. It has to do with the media. It has to do with exposing the truth, and that's what a lot of us are at work trying to do. He compares the problem to a boil. It's from the letter from the Birmingham City Jail, and it goes like this: like a boil that can never be cured as long as it's covered up, but must be opened with all its pus-flowing ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light, so too injustice must be exposed, with all the friction its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. And that I see as our problem tonight. How are we going to expose all this injustice when the media has been captured? We have no fourth estate anymore. Where the best we have, and this is the hopeful thing, is we have a fifth estate, which is called the ether and the computers and the web. And what we need to do, people my age and younger, to learn how to use this better than we're doing now, and there is hope in that. Now, let me just recall living and growing up in the Bronx for 22 years with a family who was very religious. And what I mean by religious is they never went to bed without reading the New York Times. It was not allowed. As a matter of fact, if Dad kind of dozed off after a hard day at work, and didn't finish the New York Times, my brother Larry here can attest to what would happen to that New York Times. So Larry, do you remember what he'd do? Stand up and say, you, yeah.
I do not recall.
Well, okay, well, so you can tell this was not rehearsed, right? Well, at least in my day, Larry's a lot older than I was. But in my day, there was a special place that my dad and mom would put the New York Times from yesterday, and no one would dare open the New York Times for today until they had finished reading the one from yesterday. That's how seriously they took it. Now what do you have? Well, you have a charade. Here's the title of a very big article. I think it was in the Sunday Times, August 31, 2016. Title: How Russia Often Benefits When Julian Assange Reveals the West's Secrets. Subtitle: American officials say Mr. Assange and WikiLeaks probably have no direct ties to Russian intelligence services, but the agendas of WikiLeaks and the Kremlin often dovetail. Whoa. Now, what does WikiLeaks trade in? Documentary evidence. They don't fool around with it. They've been criticized for not redacting it. So are we saying here that because the evidence that WikiLeaks publishes is documentary, and that even the CIA and the U.S. government recognize it as true, and it dovetails with what the Kremlin is saying? Oh, I mean, could that be possibly, like, maybe because it's true? Huh? Now, I'd like to show you a little short video. It's 4 minutes, and it's what happens to someone like me who says these kinds of things on CNN. Last time for me on CNN. Yep. Please. You'll see how he ends. He said, well, I guess that will be it. Number one? Yeah, number one, the first one. Okay. Not yet. Okay, no problem. Technical difficulties, the CIA has all manner of intrusive capabilities. I worked on this very, very hard for an hour this evening, but I kid you not, seriously, okay? Now, how did WikiLeaks get the information that showed how Hillary Clinton stole the nomination from Bernie Sanders? How did they get that? What have you been told by the New York Times? They got it from a Russian hack, right? Well, forget about it. It wasn't a Russian hack. It was a leak. What's a leak? You put a thumb drive in a computer. You download it. It doesn't go on the network. It doesn't go on the web. And you put it in an envelope. You send it to one of Julian Assange's lieutenants, and it gets published. And this one was published 2 days before the Democratic National Committee. So what happened? Well, there was an emergency 2 days before the committee. What did the content show of these emails? That Hillary and her 5 chief people on the Democratic National Committee, they quit on the spot. What does that tell you? Right? Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the 4 others. And so what did the content say? Well, doesn't matter. They convened a little council and they said, now, how are we going to handle this? My God, what's Bernie going to do? Holy Moses, he's kind of caved in now, but what'll he do when he finds out that there's evidence from our own emails that we stole the election from him? Oh my God, Somebody says, I know who we do. We'll blame it on the Russians. And somebody says, well, but it wasn't the Russians, it was WikiLeaks, Julian Assange. That's okay. We'll say that Julian Assange is working with the Russians. Oh, that's starting to make sense, but what would be the objective? Well, come on, of course, the Russians want Trump to win. Now, that's the major premise, right? The Russians want Trump to win. I've been studying Russian leadership for more than half a century, okay? I think I know something about how the Russians look at life. And I can just see Vladimir Putin sitting around the table with his associates and saying, man, this Trump is really interesting. God, he's unpredictable. He brags about being unpredictable, and he lashes out at the least slight, whether it's real or imagined. Oh, man, this is going to be great. This is just the guy that I want to have with his fingers on the nuclear codes. Man, this is going to be wonderful. Let's help him win. Give me a break. I think that Putin, like everyone, thought Hillary was going to win. So unless you think he's clairvoyant, why would he take the risk of hacking into the DNC computers and giving her another reason to hate him, huh? But more important, why would he kind of do this to help an unpredictable guy win? So the whole syllogism falls apart if the major premise is that he looked at it like most of my German friends. I was in Germany when this happened, the election, and they said, we see that it is eine Wahl zwischen Pest und Cholera. Some of you know it's a choice between plague and cholera, That's how I looked at it, and I dare say I think Putin looked at it. Well, anyhow, they decided to go with this, okay? And it was masterful. Because what you saw in the New York Times in the following days, in the Washington Post and Wall Street Journal, is the Russians hacked. Why did they hack? The Russians hacked into the DNC computers to affect the election, okay? Big deal, okay? Jennifer Palmieri, who is the PR person for Hillary Clinton, brags about going around to the cable tents at the convention and selling the notion that the Russians wanted Trump to win, and so they hacked into the DNC computers. And she comments very openly, this is a hard sell, but we did our best. And then when we got back to Brooklyn, then the intelligence people came in and they gave us the evidence. Whoa, that's from Palmieri. I was there when she said it, okay? So what does that mean? Well, that means that John Brennan and others, head of the CIA at the time, gave her the wherewithal, the information from very classified sources, and they were able to construct this, this fable that Russia hacked into the Democratic National Committee to try to help Trump win. Well, why is this important? Because right now we have a fellow named James Comey, right? And he was head of the FBI at the time. And for some reason, best known to him, he never got physical access to the DNC computers. He never was able to do forensics on it to see who hacked in. Did you know that? Did you watch him before the House Intelligence Committee? He's sort of squirming and he says, well, I appreciate that it's really good to have direct access to this, to the machines and the computers, but we didn't get direct access. So the next best thing is we relied on the commercial outfit called CrowdStrikes, and they're quite good, so we relied on their forensics. Well, why all this, folks? Why all this? It's because the Russians, did they try to hack into the DNC? I imagine 60 foreign countries tried to hack into the DNC. Were the Russians responsible for the leak that exposed what Hillary Clinton and the rest of them were doing? No, they weren't. But what about CrowdStrike's finding little bits of Cyrillic? Ooh, Cyrillic, that's Russian, isn't it? Yeah, that's Russian language. They find it, and they find the name and patronymic, Felix Edmundovich, of the first head of the KGB. Whoa, telltale signs. If you're an intelligence analyst or just a reasonable person, that smells really fishy right off the bat, doesn't it? Well, now I can tell you. This is off the record. I don't want this to leave this room, okay? But you know who hacked in to the DNC? John Brennan and the CIA. How many know that already? Whoa, you don't read my website. You don't read Consortium News. Come on, you guys. If you don't, all right, yeah, there are people from my Veterans for Peace folks over there that know that, all right? Now, how do I know that? Well, folks, I'm sorry to tell you, but you won't find out from the New York Times. You know why they hate WikiLeaks? Well, they hate them for lots of reasons. But WikiLeaks got access to what they call Vault 7, which is a treasure trove of original CIA documents. So, the third release came on August 31st. I got a call from CNN? No. From CBS? No. From RT. Would you come in and talk about this incredible thing? What incredible thing? Well, it just happened overnight, but we want to be first off the mark. Well, tell me about it. Oh, we'll send you a link. They send me a link, and I download it, it's printed out, and then I'm in the car, and to get there in time, I have to go in the carpool lane there into Washington. But, I'm reading this thing, and then I had the presence of mind to call Bill Binney. Now, how many know who Bill Binney is? Ah, good. He was the technical director of NSA, right? So I says, Bill, this looks like a big deal. The CIA has developed this capability to hack into a computer network or server and, in the CIA's words, obfuscate who hacked in and leave telltale signs like, well, they work in 5 languages: Chinese, Persian, Arabic, Korean, and Russian. Wow. Now I said, Bill, this sounds pretty important. Tell me how to think about this. This is the beauty of having a community of former intelligence officers who you can depend on to tell you the truth, okay? So Bill says, look, Ray, this is what this is about. NSA and CIA worked for 15 years on this program. I know about it. I was there when it started. It's an incredibly sophisticated program. It involves 700 million lines of code. 700 million. So McGovern says, sounds like a lot, Bill. But what does that mean? He says, well, I'll put it this way. Each line of code costs $25, Ray. Do the math, will you? Do the math, okay? So here we have a program, 15 years in the making. CIA implements it because they do the dirty work, but NSA pretty much streamed it up. It costs this much. CrowdStrike's going to find out about that program? No way are they going to find out. They don't have the capability. So who hacked into the Democratic National Committee computers? It was this incredible program that NSA and the CIA worked out together, okay, implemented. It was used once in 2016, we know from the CIA documents. Look, this is not make-believe news. This is CIA documents recognized as such. Okay, now I need to stop, but I'm going to add one more thing. Does this explain, perhaps, why James Comey was reluctant to send his technical experts in to look at the computers of the DNC? Visualize it. Okay? Here's Comey, who is part of this deep state. Comey, John Brennan from the CIA, and assortment of those uniformed admirals and generals at NSA that just do what they're told. Okay? So what we have here is a situation where Comey is in on this act. The last thing he's going to do is send his specialists to get physical access to the computers at DNC, because they might come back and say, Director Comey, you won't believe what we found. Yeah, this is a sophisticated program. Man, CrowdStrike could never figure this out. We can't figure it out. Would you like us to enlist the help of NSA? Comey would have to, no, thanks just the same. No, don't go to NSA. So that's how corrupt this thing is. That's how melded the CIA, FBI, and the NSA are. Those are the three major organs of this deep state. And, the last word I'd say is that people recognize this. I don't have a very high regard for your Senator Chuck Schumer, but I'm going to quote him anyway. On Rachel Maddow, on the 3rd of January, he permitted himself to say, "Now, Rachel, I used to think that the President Trump was pretty clever, CIA again, pretty clever guy, okay? But he's done a very foolish thing." And Rachel said, "Oh, what's that?" He's taken on the intelligence people, and they have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. So I thought he was a pretty smart businessman. He'd pick his quarrels, right? But he's done a very foolish thing. So Rachel Maddow, facing into this glorious opportunity to say, Senator Schumer, are you saying that the President of the United States should be afraid of the CIA? I mean, if you were interviewing Schumer, isn't that what you would say, right? But Rachel says, we'll go to break. We'll go to break now. We'll go to break now. So, Schumer said it. That's how the Congress looks at it. These oversight committees, they're really overlook committees. They pretend to oversight, okay? And you got even some of the judiciary collaborating in this. So we're in a pretty parlous state of affairs, folks. And to the degree we can get this knowledge up and out, all I can say is you can't depend on the New York Times anymore, but you can depend on websites where you can get the real information. I highly recommend consortiumnews.com, which is the best website run by investigative journalist Bob Perry. I am privileged to write for it, as many other people write for it as well. And I have my own website, which my son, who runs it, always asks me whether I mention it. And I want to be able to say yes this time. I usually forget. It's raymcgovern.com. Really hard to remember, raymcgovern.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. I think I grew up in that same religion that you did in your family with the New York Times, except I was still following it as an adult. I'm a little embarrassed to admit now. But at any rate, so thank you. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Mark Crispin Miller, who is a professor of media studies at New York University and author of the book Fooled Again, the real case for electoral reform. He's known for his writing on American media and for his activism on behalf of democratic media reform. His books include Boxed In, The Culture of TV, Seeing Through Movies, and the Bush Dyslexicon, Observations on a National Disorder. Mr. Crispin Miller graduated from Northwestern University with a BA in 1971, Johns Hopkins with an MA in 1973, and a PhD in 1977. Mark Crispin Miller.
Well, thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Ray, for preceding me. And thank you all for coming, despite the fact that our headliner didn't show up, right? I mean, as a TV show, because he was worried about security. I'm worried about security, too, but I showed up anyway. Your story about Rachel Maddow, Ray, brought a few things to mind for me. Why didn't she ask the question, are you saying that the president should be afraid of the CIA? Well, it would be miraculous if she had asked that question, because that whole subject is taboo for something of the same reason that it's been a very relevant question for well over 50 years. Now, let me preface what I'm about to say by quoting someone I don't often quote publicly or privately. That's Adolf Hitler. Okay, who in one very memorable passage in Mein Kampf writes, "The receptivity of the masses is great, their intelligence is small, but their power of forgetting is enormous." Okay? I wish I could say something that I often believed growing up, which is that that's a problem in places like Germany under Hitler, or the Soviet Union, or North Korea. But it's really a universal problem. It's a problem everywhere. And it's all the greater of a problem in places where the press, and of course the schools as well, don't really trade in the truth. Okay? We are all afflicted with a certain amount of social and historical amnesia. And I think the press is sort of in the business of affirming that amnesia. The people who are most afflicted with that amnesia rise the highest in the press world. So it's unlikely that Rachel Maddow would remember or allow herself to remember or to know that John Kennedy had said that he wanted to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. He said this out of understandable pique that he had been lied to by Alan Dulles and the rest of them about the Bay of Pigs. And he was well aware throughout his all too brief presidency that he had lost control of the government and was trying to reclaim it from the CIA, the Joint Chiefs, and others. You could very well say that the dramatic climax of his presidency made pretty clear that, yeah, the answer to that question is yes, the president has something to fear from the CIA. That's what happened in Dealey Plaza. And there are some few very excellent books about Watergate that also make a pretty strong case that was actually a coup, because for very different reasons, Richard Nixon didn't like the CIA. Now, he had terrible problems, there's no doubt about it. He was obviously nuts. That's all true. But Watergate was not the heroic story of two intrepid reporters backed by this great liberal paper who fought this thuggish cabal in the White House. You've all seen All the President's Men, It wasn't like that at all. And at some other point tonight, if anyone wants to know, I can list some of the books people may want to read about this, but the fact is that also was a coup, a bloodless coup. And, one that also basically put an end to a president who, in his own way, had a problem with the CIA. A president who, believe it or not, was suspected of pro-Soviet leanings by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who had him under surveillance well before Watergate. Now, I mentioned a few of these things that may have brought to a few minds in the room the phrase conspiracy theory. Okay, conspiracy theory. And I want to say something about that because it's directly relevant to the notion of fake news. Fake news is actually conspiracy theory 2.0. Okay? Fake news. Fake news is a smear. It's a meme. It's a weaponized meme that's used basically to discredit inconvenient information. That's what fake news is. But let's go back to conspiracy theory. Okay? Conspiracy theory, I had a personal reason for wanting to know more about the history of that phrase. And the reason was that I had a book come out, you were kind enough to mention it, Fooled Again, came out in 2005, about the theft of the 2004 election. And, I worked on this book with great excitement and the highest hopes that it would kickstart an important national discussion of the fact that we actually have the worst voting system in the developed world. I mean, this according to Harvard and the University of Sydney. They do an annual survey of election systems globally, and in their the last edition of their study, which was last February, they ranked the USA 26th out of 26. We have the worst voting system in the developed world, something Jimmy Carter said on NPR in 2006. Elections in this country are so corrupt that they don't even rise to the minimal level where the Carter Center would monitor them. That's how bad they are. Yet, interestingly enough, let me add, parenthetically, the Carter Center came out as part of the chorus decrying Russia's interference in our elections. It was just kind of a shock. At any rate, my book came out. I'd worked hard on it. It was full of entirely accurate endnotes. And, as they say, crickets. Crickets. Nothing. 2 newspaper reviews from coast to coast. One was a pan. No interviews on NPR, on which I had been a frequent guest, talking about things like Madonna and, pop culture. Important stuff, not the survival of American democracy. A friend of mine offered to put up some money so we could run ads on WHYY-FM. That's Philadelphia's, national public radio affiliate. He lives in Philly. He said, I like your book. I'll contribute some money. Let's write some spots. He called them. He said, do you take ads for books? They said, sure. So we wrote these little spots. We sent them over. More crickets. He didn't hear back. He called and asked, well, what happened? And they said, well, we're not going to run those spots. And he said, well, why not? We agreed that you would. He said, well, we don't do political advertising. So he said, well, Mark Crispin Miller's not running for president. Political advertising. This is a book that he wrote about an election, and the answer he got was, well, we're not just going to advertise any book. I mean, we wouldn't advertise Mein Kampf. Okay, that's in stand-up comics refer to that as a callback, because I already brought up Mein Kampf tonight. Okay. Not that this is very funny. At any rate, I'm going to run out of time because I have so much to say. My heart is full. But let me quickly say that I was struck by the fact that, the corporate media, it was a blackout. The left press attacked me. Okay, Mother Jones, The Nation, Salon, they attacked me. And they called me a conspiracy theorist. And they referred to the book as conspiracy theory. And this is the same way they treated Bobby Kennedy Jr. and, Steve Freeman and others who'd written on the subject. It's conspiracy theory. It's conspiracy theory. Okay, so I decided I wanted to know where this phrase had come from. What's the history of this phrase? And having studied the archives of the Times, the Washington Post, and Time magazine, I discovered that conspiracy theory was not much used by journalists for the decades prior to 1967, when suddenly it's used all the time, and increasingly ever since. And the reason for this is that the CIA at that time sent a memo to its station chiefs worldwide, urging them to use their propaganda assets and friends in the media to discredit the work of Mark Lane, Edward J. These are books attacking the Warren Commission report. See? These books were coming out. Mark Lane's was a bestseller. So the CIA's response was to send out this memo urging a counterattack so that hacks responsive to the agency would write reviews attacking these authors as conspiracy theorists and using one or more of 5 specific arguments listed in the memo. 5 more minutes, thank you. For example, if there were a conspiracy, somebody would have talked by now. You've heard this a million times. Okay. So over the years since then, the phrase has been used more and more and more about a longer and longer list of subjects. Jack Kennedy's assassination, Bobby's assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, 9/11, certainly, election theft. This is all conspiracy theory. Any discussion of false flag terror, right? Conspiracy theory. The CIA would never do a thing like that. It doesn't happen. It's crazy. It's nuts. Irresponsible. It's dangerous. Okay? Fake news is the horrible offspring of conspiracy theory. Okay? And it has come to dominate many minds because of the rise of Donald Trump. Okay? Whose function has been, he has several functions. One of them has been to, I call him the deodorant in chief, because he sanctifies the entire rest of the system. Do you know what I mean? So all these people now think, you like that, right? I like it too. People now think 2 things. They think the CIA and the FBI are on our side. They believe in democracy. Thank God they're there, okay, to protect us from Russia. This is liberals now. This is liberals saying this, okay? And his other function has been to make people think that the New York Times and CNN and MSNBC and NPR, blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, 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 tell the truth. And they have taken ferocious advantage of this delusion by constantly reminding us how dear to us they are, because they tell us the truth, unlike Trump, who's always lying. Okay? Trump, yeah, he lies all the time. His lips are moving, he's probably lying. But the lies that Trump tells are mostly trivial lies, stupid little lies, like there was a terrorist attack in Sweden when there wasn't one. Or he had, 70 million people at his inauguration when he obviously didn't, I could go on. You all know these outrageous lies. I have people all over Facebook are screaming and yelling and flipping out about these horrible lies, and the New York Times can't get over it. He claimed that Obama tapped his phone. Oh, my God, he has no proof. How could he say? Where's his evidence for this? Like all the evidence they've adduced for Russiagate, all that evidence, right? These are trivial lies, and not only that, the fact that he does lie is screamingly obvious. That is not dangerous. That is not 1984. People are telling us 1984, it's about Trump. That's absurd. That's something people say who haven't read the book. Because far more dangerous than any of his flagrant and trivial, idiotic lies are the whoppers that have been successfully put across by the corporate press and the left liberal press in many cases, such as Putin invaded Ukraine, and where contradicting them is so intensely reviled. And this is all the doing of liberals. That's what's unusual about this. That's what makes this unlike the first Red Scare, not the very first Red Scare, but the one after World War II, when it was mostly, troglodyte right-wingers and demented birchers and so on. Now it's Democrats and some progressives. And it's not just the corporate press, as I say, it's the left liberal press as well. And it's not just the left liberal press and the corporate press, but it's our premier comedians. It's Stephen Colbert. It's Bill Maher. It's people like Saturday Night Live, which is, if that's not a propaganda instrument for the deep state, whatever you want to call it, I don't know what one is, because they've done bits, frequent bits vilifying Putin and Russians generally. They've done parodies of Dilma Rousseff. It is nonstop State Department propaganda coming from our most important weekly comedy review show. Find stuff like this on House of Cards, where Pussy Riot play themselves. There's a kind of, an evil Putin character who fits directly in with the New York Times version, and so on. And the propaganda juggernaut even includes Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. Okay? So what we're talking about is an enormously successful, inescapable propaganda machine that must have Dr. Goebbels grinning ear to ear in his birth in hell, because it has actually managed to determine the furnishings of countless minds of our fellow citizens, I fear to disastrous effect. As Ray says, the only real salvation that we have is online. It's in those websites that have somehow managed to maintain a certain amount of journalistic integrity, and it's in the young people who now have a tremendous amount of facility with the internet and have discovered that you can find the other side of the story in seconds. I take great hope from that, and I hope that you can share that hope with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. I'll move it a little closer. So thank you both. You both touched on some very important points here, and we're now going to have a conversation. And I think it's important to talk about this term fake news. I don't know who else recalls after Election Day, and Obama went to Germany, and he was appearing with Angela Merkel. And I'm sure he was, first of all, shocked that Trump had won. I'm sure it was to have been a fly on the wall during those days. But at any rate, he mentioned fake news several times, and Angela Merkel kind of was looking at him like, what are you talking about? And I think the reason they go on and on about fake news is that they know we can get information for ourselves. And that's very dangerous. And that's why there's bulk collection of data, why they have keep records of all our phone calls, all our emails, so that when some moment is reached, they know who to look for. And I guess that's a conspiracy theory. But at any rate, so this is where we are with this term fake news, which is used to shut us up, in short. But you said, you touched on, I'll start with you, Mark. You touched on something about Trump's lies. You said that they're obvious and they're about trivial things. And one of the things that strikes me since Trump won, it's very clear that presentation is everything. So Obama could get away with the most horrible lies, telling people that Gaddafi was going to kill his own people, or I think it was Human Rights Watch who helped with that, saying Gaddafi had given his troops Viagra and they were going to go around raping women so that we wouldn't say anything about this war crime committed against that country. America is indispensable, which means everybody else is dispensable. The numerous lies about very serious matters, lies about Russia. It's astounding. It's astounding to me how if you're smooth, you can get away with anything. I mean, I guess I always knew that, but I really see that now with Trump because of who Trump is, because the kind of person he is, the buffoonery, the lack of knowledge, no need to go on and on describing him. But it's easy to dismiss him because of his presentation. And that to me is very, very frightening. And instead of being disregarded, the things that you mentioned, those are the things that are taken most seriously. So Anyway, I just wanted to start off with that. I don't know if you had if you wanted to expound on it or if you wanted to add.
Do you mind? Yeah, that's a very important point. Style, personality count for a tremendous amount, obviously. And Obama's very smooth, very deft, very likable. And so, all too predictably, millions of people who should know better have been perfectly willing to look past the things he's done, even when they've been demonstrably more heinous than things that Bush Cheney did in many instances. Whereas suddenly they're horrible when Trump does them, right? So all those dead civilians in Yemen as a result of a botched attack by our military under Trump, that's front page news, right? But the vast expansion of the drone program under Obama and the countless civilians who were killed in those attacks, they couldn't, as the expression has it, they couldn't get arrested. They could get bombed, but they couldn't, no coverage for that at all. Trump has always struck me as being like the bad guy in a professional wrestling match. Do you know what I mean? Or like, Tony Clifton, the thing that Andy Kaufman did, the kind of horrible, nightclub singer, was abusive and ugly. And that's what, I always thought that's what Trump is. That Trump is, he's over the top. He's so horrible. And I said throughout the campaign, and I'm not going to apologize for this, as everybody's bending over backwards to apologize for making the same statement. I said throughout the campaign, this guy does not want to win. This guy is saying all these outrageous things. He's trying to get the biggest possible rise out of people. He's offending huge constituency after huge constituency. He obviously doesn't want to be president. He wants to start a TV network like Fox, Fox 2.0, where he can be outrageous on camera. That's why Trump went to bed early on election night. It wasn't only Obama who was surprised. It was Trump. Trump had he had no expectation he was going to win. And you know what? Can I just get into a little more conspiracy theory? He didn't win. Okay? Those of us who try to keep our eye on the ball and look at the evidence in elections, as opposed to thinking what we want to think, have pretty much determined that Trump-Pence didn't win in the swing states, where there was rampant vote suppression, and there's copious evidence of the same computerized election fraud that Bush Cheney used to win their two elections, and let me add, that was used to give Hillary Clinton the nomination for her party. There's no question about it, right? I mean, this Democracy Lost from Election Justice USA, it's online, it's over 100 pages, chapter and verse. That was stolen. There were 11 primaries. I mean, I could go into it and I think persuade even the most skeptical that that's true. But the fact is, Trump didn't win, so the media didn't get it wrong. Hillary didn't lose because she's grotesquely out of touch with the American people, though she is grotesquely out of touch with the American people. She didn't lose because she's a warmongering Wall Street shill, which she is. I'm not going to argue with that. She is that. But the fact is, I think the evidence is pretty clear that enough people voted against him that she should have won. Okay? Whatever we may think of her. See? Now, what we have here is this back and forth. You've suggested this to me. We've got this back and forth where you've got a really kind of lethal corporate Democrat who is a creature of the intelligence community and lets the military do whatever they want, among other failings. But he's cool. He's our first black president. He's a cool guy. He's a Democrat. He says progressive things. He pays lip service to this stuff, like gay marriage. Okay? Then you got Trump, who's just this creature. He's grotesque with the comb over and the little hands. You've all heard it. He's a thug. He's a goon. He's embarrassing. He's ignorant. All this stuff is true. Everybody's going mad about how much they hate him. When he's gone, they're going to miss him. That's how much people enjoy hating Trump, right? But just as with, he's the deodorant in chief, he makes the CIA and FBI look good, he makes the press look honest, he also makes his Democratic counterparts look, oh, thank God they've saved us. Do you know what I'm saying? If and when we get back to business as usual, whenever that is, if it proves to be continually impossible actually to elect a real progressive, although a real progressive could win in a cakewalk in this country, it could happen. If we actually did reform the voting system to the point that somebody like that could win, the will of the electorate could be honored. Okay, that would be one thing. But if we're going to go back to this fake battle between two parties that are in collusion on issue after issue, then I'm afraid that this theatrical stuff that we're talking about is going to be kind of the reason why.
Did you want to add anything to that, Ray?
Yeah, I would just say that when I was reading the latest poll from AP about how many Americans are convinced that the Trump campaign had very illicit, suspicious, and really bad contacts with Russia, the proportion was 68% believed that in one way or another, and 49 of that 68% believed it really strongly, okay? That reminded me of right before the war in Iraq, when 69% of the people in the United States were convinced that Saddam Hussein not only had weapons of mass destruction, not only was a partner of Osama bin Laden, but that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11. 69%, folks. 68% now. That's really dangerous. And if I were Vladimir Putin, I'd be watching this very, very closely, because the more that our liberal folks, and you didn't mention Amy Goodman, but she's, she deserves to be put in that camp, which I say to my great distress, because I have great admiration for what Amy does domestically. I mean, Standing Rock and all that stuff. I mean, she's terrific. I've learned more American history from Amy Goodman than I have in my history books. But on foreign policy, she's drunk the Kool-Aid. And there's nothing at all that I can do or say, or that others can do or say, we can break through that thing. As recently as, yesterday with Oliver Stone. She's, insinuating a little thing here about the hacking, for the Russian hacking. So what I'm saying here is that this is really dangerous. And I think we're called to be more aware now, since we went through Iraq in March of 2003. We're in that preparatory period where Mad Dog Mattis would be just as happy as a lark to launch whatever Trump told him to do. And we know, actually, we don't probably know, but Cy Hirsch. Anybody know who Cy Hirsch is? Okay. You remember he used to work for the New York Times. He used to write stories about what the CIA was doing in the 50s and 60s. And he wrote about My Lai, and he wrote about Abu Ghraib. And he's the best, the unparalleled investigative reporter. Now, he used to publish in the New Yorker. Has anybody seen any articles by Cy Hirsch in the New Yorker? How long has it been? 3, 4 years? Does he try in other publications? Yeah, he does. He can't actually publish any publication in this country. He's got to go to the London Review of Books. Now, let me tell you another story, related. He has an incredibly good article coming out within the next 3 days. It has to do what really happened with those the chemical event, let's call it, in Idlib province of Syria, okay? It was not, as we knew from our contacts, it was not a chemical weapon or bomb dropped from a Syrian plane, okay? It wasn't that at all. It was something very, very different. It was a warehouse in rebel territory containing all kinds of precursor chemicals, and it was thought to be an ammo dump They bombed it, and all of a sudden, no secondary explosions, just, this gas come over that poor village, and all those people were killed. So that's a far cry from what our president claimed. Now, Cy Hirsch has written that up, and he's been struggling for the last 2 months, to get it published. And he thought he had it ready for he thought that the London Review of Books was going to publish it just as they have his last 3, okay? Finally, they said, no, we're not going to do it. But it's coming out anyway. Watch for it this week. It'll be out in English translation. It's going to appear first abroad. So what I'm saying here is that's how bad it is. I mean, not even recognized experts, real journalists are able to tell the story in the press here. They get shunned. They're all, one other little thing. Colleen Rowley. Who knows who Colleen Rowley is? She was the incredible FBI Special Agent General Counsel, or not General Counsel, but Counsel for the Minneapolis Division, okay? She blew the whistle on all the mistakes that the FBI had made before 9/11. They were horrendous mistakes. One actually wonders whether they were really mistakes, but the crew in Washington just didn't pay any attention to all these little things that needed to be connected. Well, she wrote an incredible memo while she had 2 years left before retirement. That's guts, folks. That's guts. To Mueller, Director Mueller, who's now the special counsel for James Comey. And they published that, the New York Times did. The New York Times published another memo she wrote right before the attack on Iraq saying, look, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing, because not only is it going to be unsuccessful, but it's going to come back and haunt us in this country. Because once you believe that you can preempt stuff, right? You can use force to preempt what might happen. Then the organs of the police here in this country are going to abandon their discipline, FBI and other special agents. They're going to do preemptive force rather than the kind of force that they do under the law up till now. So all these things are at play here, and it's very concerning. The last thing I'll say is this. James Comey and Bob Mueller, I have to say, have a very distinguished reputation in the New York Times. James Comey and Bob Mueller are thugs. They were behind the war on Iraq. They were behind the torture. They were behind the illegal eavesdropping on every single one of us. And somehow or other, this has never been revealed. Now, who tried to reveal it? Oh, Colleen Rowley. She wrote an op-ed for the New York Times, and for the first time in history, they turned it down. Why? Because it exposed what Bob Mueller and James Comey not only tolerated, but fostered in way of unconstitutional activity in this country. And so, here's James Comey, and he decides to leak a memo on a conversation that he had with the president. And he has it leaked, and then, by his own admission, his aim being to have a special prosecutor named? By God, that happens. And who is it? His best friend, Bob Mueller. Now, that's really great. And besides, nobody knows what's in that real memo because he gave it to whom? Anybody know? Bob Mueller. Not the Congress, not anybody. And so this is the incestuous deep state sort of thing.
Didn't Senator Schumer say 6 ways to Sunday?
Yeah, 6 ways to Sunday. So what I'm saying is this is formidable. And, speeching is really nice. I like to quote Cesar Chavez. He used to say, it's really nice. Thanks for that op-ed. Your speech was really great. But without action, nothing's going to happen. Okay? And you say, there aren't enough of us. But I say, there are enough of us. But without action, nothing's going to happen. And that's the place we're at now. Martin Luther King said, there is such a thing as too late. It's getting pretty damn near to too late, folks. We've got to put our bodies into it and stop this foolishness and expose it to the degree we can, as Mark and others are trying to do.
Thank you. We have just a couple minutes. I think it's important to point out one thing, all this talk of Russia meddling in the election, as if the United States never meddled in anybody's election. And somebody actually counted between World War II and 2000, the United States interfered with elections 80 times. This is not coups, not invasions, not wars. Election interference, 80 times. And this has never come up as an issue. All this, it's so terrible, our democracy, as if it's okay for the United States to interfere in other countries' efforts to have a democracy. And speaking of Russia, in 1996, the United States, Bill Clinton, his then friend, was a horrible man, Dick Morris, sent people to Moscow to interfere in Russia's election. They went on record. It was a Time magazine cover story. I believe there was also a movie, an HBO movie about it. And nobody talks about that anymore. All this talk about Russia, if the Russians did interfere in our election, why is it so terrible?
Can I answer that?
Yeah,
Sure.
How many of you watched Megyn Kelly's interview with Putin? Okay, or watched what NBC broadcast of the interview? Because, they made liberal cuts in the full-length version, and one of the things they cut was Putin's point-by-point rebuttal of Megyn Kelly's brief against him as this, thug who murders his dissidents and journalists and so on. One of the things he said was that the U.S. had done much more and far worse than even he had been accused of doing. U.S. interference in elections falls under that heading. One of the things that's important to note, everybody's heard of the Church Committee report from the mid-'70s, right? The Senate investigation of the CIA. Very few people have heard of the Pike Committee report, which was the House investigation at the same time. That was a hearing, an investigation that was subverted and sabotaged by the CIA just as surely as they sabotaged the 9/11 Commission. And the Senate then classified the report. So it's actually never been available to American readers. If you want a copy of the Pike report, you have to get it from Amazon UK, where it has an introduction by Philip Agee, right? The renegade CIA officer. It's worth getting a copy. Reformed, right? It's worth getting a copy because the Pike report makes the point in its second of 3 sections that election work is probably what the CIA had been doing most of worldwide, with the possible exception of propaganda. Okay? That's probably the primary reason why the Pike report was classified and why it's still unavailable. All of that we're talking about really has to do with the fact that the press is at the service of the state and constantly prettifying the picture. There is so much about our past, about our present, that we cannot know, we cannot even talk about without incurring the boundless wrath of the press, which functions just as cruelly and mercilessly to critics of the system as you could say the press in the Soviet Union did.
Yeah, and
Let me just add
1 minute.
Yeah,
So we
1
can start
minute
with our,
quote to that, and that is that this, when Megyn Kelly said, what about your suppressing of all dissent there in Russia, it's just terrible. And Putin very coolly said, well, when we deal with demonstrators, we deal with them according to the law, and our organs of state security, the police, are unarmed.
Yes.
Whoa, unarmed. Yeah, they don't have automatic weapons. They don't have any weapons. And look at even these terrible photos that you see in the New York Times about the demonstration. See if those Russian police are armed. They're not, okay? And they don't have to be armed because they don't have this damn Second Amendment abuse in Russia, okay? It's not easy to get a weapon in Russia. But my point is this. He said, I remember Occupy Wall Street. Do you remember Occupy Wall Street? Do you remember? Yeah, okay. Many of us were there, right? He says, what happened? The organs of state security got all around, and they suppressed it together, and that was the end of Occupy Wall Street. He goes.
Yes.
It was amazing.
Well,
and that's what happened, right? We have these clusters now, CIA, FBI, Homeland Security, you name it, NSA, DIA, they all have these clusters, what do they call them? Fusion centers, yeah. Yeah, and so they get together, and with the mayors of Oakland or the mayors of Baltimore, and they say, well, now, whoa, these people look, crush them or come invade them at 2 o'clock in the morning. So, Putin was typically, sort of sang-froid, sort of, what about what you did to Wall Street? And then he goes,
well, what about the fact that police in this country kill 3 people every day? Anyway, but we're supposed to be the ones with better human rights. So we run over a little bit. We do have to have our Q&A now. There's a microphone there, and I know, so please line up if you cannot get to the microphone. I know one is going to be, it's the same mic? So
if somebody has serious mobility issues, they will take their place and take the mic.
okay. So if anybody, does anybody fit that category? You have a question but can't get to the mic, raise your hand. Nobody?
No, I know.
Okay.
I know. I'll try
So
to-
we've run over. This is always, the time always goes so fast, so much faster than you think. So I'm going to try to be strict here, be fair but strict. So questions, not statements, not speeches, and I'm gonna be strict about this. And it should take you less than 60 seconds to ask your question.
All right,
So go ahead.
less than 60 seconds. My name's Richard. Thank you very much for talking about the Russian non-hacking. I've been fighting with people for this for about a year now, and I've gotten so many people pissed off, but I keep doing it. I guess probably 2 quick questions. I read a report recently, this is about the Russian hacking again, about 33 more states have discovered they were hacked. And it seems to be, like you said, a progression of like the Iraq War, where they just keep putting out more propaganda until they get the numbers up high enough, where it seems ultimately like they want to have a war with Russia, which is what I think is what they want. That's kind of my first question. My second question is...
I should have also had one question.
Okay, then let me ask my second question, I'll make that my question. When you talk about propaganda, a lot of people think, well, I'm really smart, I would know propaganda when I see it. So I just would like to get your response on that, because I don't think that's true. Things get reported, I don't know if it's propaganda or not, so I just want to get your feedback on that.
Well, I can answer that quickly. We're all
And
able...
1 minute answers, too.
We're all able to perceive propaganda that we don't agree with, right? And deplore it as propaganda. But we cannot perceive the most successful propaganda, which is why it is successful. You see? So if it comes to us in the raiment of the New York Times, which we trust and have come to know throughout our lives, the great gray lady, we can't think that it's propaganda. If we see some screaming, Soviet poster or something squawking over Chinese loudspeakers, we can say, yeah, that's propaganda. But it is precisely in the nature of winning propaganda to come at us as something other than what it is. So people who think they're too smart for it are, misinformed.
Okay. Go ahead. Do you have any? 60
Okay, let me
seconds.
just address the Russian part of that. Look, it's very easy. Peace is very bad for arms traders. Who Pope Francis had the guts to say before Congress in September of last year, the blood-drenched arms traders are the problem. And so there's been a real resurgence of the arms manufacture and trade since they exploited the coup that we mounted in Kiev to justify more tension with Russia. Now, I want to say that no one in his right mind would want to get in a war with Russia. But there are a lot of people not in their right mind. Mad Dog Mattis, by definition, is not in his right mind. And so I think that we can't be sort of lackadaisical and say, well, this will never happen, because you push the Russians so far.